You're listening to AudioMag, Magazines Canada's podcast. I'm Kiley Pole, Manager of Member Services and Benefits at Magazines Canada, and I'm here today speaking with Sharine Taylor, a Toronto-based writer, critic, editor, producer, and director, as well as the editor-in-chief and publisher of BASHY magazine. Out of all of her many accomplishments, Sharine is here to speak with us about the building of community through a magazine. Welcome, Sharine, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
For those who maybe aren't familiar with BASHY, why don't you give us a quick description of the magazine and the specific community that you reach through it?
For sure. So BASHY is a magazine that focuses on Jamaica and its diaspora. So we discuss culture, music, food, film, style, arts, anything basically relating back to Jamaica in the diaspora and Jamaican cultural production. I would say that the community that we focus on, I wouldn't say it's niche because the Jamaican diaspora is so large and it's global, and there are more people in the diaspora than there are back on the island, but I would say it's niche as well in the capacity that we strictly focus our content on Jamaica. So it's like for any folks that are Jamaican or of the diaspora, or who just have a general interest in Jamaican music culture and anything of that sort.
I like that you include people who maybe don't have direct ties with Jamaica itself. I think that's really amazing, especially in Canada when there's so many diverse peoples and who have, many different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you found that your ties with the community that you reach has led to positive contributions between the magazine, like it's a give and take situation?
Absolutely. Like one of the things that sort of came out of it, like really unintentionally, was that a lot of folks are interested in getting into journalism or like photojournalism, and there aren't many places for folks to have access to get a byline, which is like what they would need in order to build their portfolio. And one of the positive effects of BASHY is that it becomes a place for those folks to build up their portfolios. So oftentimes, and I know this from experience of like both writing for BASHY, but also as like a freelance music and culture writer, is that things about the Caribbean or like Jamaica are not really part of the regular news cycles if it's not like Caravana in like Toronto. And pitching to other based like US or UK based publications, there's really a little bit of legwork that goes into talking about the relevance of talking about Jamaican folks or Jamaican communities when pitching to editors, not realizing that like I've already mentioned that the diaspora exists everywhere. So there are readerships even within those publications that kind of content would cater to. By BASHY being so specific with its pool of content that it creates, it allows people to get varied understandings of Jamaican identities, and at the same time of people from on the island and across the diaspora penning these things, it also allows them to add more to their editorial or photo portfolios.
That's really great. I like the idea of helping each other and building a community, which is kind of the whole point of us talking here today.
Right.
So was it an important part when you started BASHY maybe an objective or a goal of the magazine to create this feedback loop?
I think I don't think it was like one of the like something that I had written down, but I realized in the process of doing it that like contributors were telling me like, oh, I used this writing sample to apply to this thing, or I needed a writing sample for something and it was used here. So that was a really great thing that we were able to cultivate. The original purpose, though, was to um, just provide a space to talk about things that I hadn't seen growing up in terms of literature or publications that spoke directly to Jamaica's music and cultural production. A lot of the media and magazines and literature that I was engaged with didn't really speak to that, which I thought was so strange. The first time I had read anything in literature relating to Jamaican identity was like a few years ago when I read Nicole Dennis Benn's Here Comes the Sun. And then prior to that, the only thing that I had that I can think of in the media was like Global TV's The Kink in My Hair, which was done by Trey Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all like really late in life interactions with, media that spoke to aspects of my identity. And the more I started to engage with print, by one being a writer and then editor, and then transitioning to the editor-in-chief of my campus's publication, where we were publishing in a monthly magazine format, I just like thought that it made sense. I really call Bashi like a culmination of all these things that I was interested in and exploring into one thing.
That's so amazing to hear that. And I know that that's been a common thread with a lot of the independent magazines that I've touched base with, is they didn't feel like their experience was being reflected, and so they created an opportunity.
Right.
So do you find or do you feel that you were aware of how big the community was before you started, or has it kind of been a shock at how wide and varied your community really is?
I think it was more, I was really overwhelmed by the amount of support and by its reach. So sometimes when I look in our, like to see like where our print issues end up, and they're like in Europe and like countries that I've like not heard before, or the far places that they're going to, it's sort of overwhelming that the interest has been something beyond my immediate circle of friends or like my immediate group or beyond the city. I think that it has shown me that there are folks that are interested in engaging in this kind of content. And so it sort of means to me that there's a need for it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And even just from looking at your website, which is beautiful, by the way, props to whoever designed that.
It was me.
Oh, even better. You can tell that Bashi extends beyond, the pages of a magazine or the pages of your website. Can you give us a little information on how you decided what the brand would encompass?
Yeah, so when I was interacting with either video work or editorials that explored Jamaican identity, I felt like they were very, I don't know, they were just missing a little bit of something. Whether it be like firsthand insight or just a more closer attachment. A lot of the times, who was dictating, Jamaican culture, who was getting the most editorial space about Jamaican culture, like they weren't Jamaican people. Not to say that like non-Jamaican folks aren't allowed to write about the culture, but I did feel like something was missing. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand of it, a lot of the things that you engage in that might be a part of your heritage, sometimes you don't think of it as something worth discussing. And the more I began to talk about, like, especially amongst my friends living in Toronto, like, there's a huge Jamaican diaspora community here. So a lot of my friends were from the Caribbean as well, or had Caribbean backgrounds. And we'd always joke about stuff that like our parents used to say, or we heard our grandparents say, or saw somebody who was Jamaican did, or anything like that. And I would always like think that, this is something that we should write about. Like amongst us, it's funny. But I do think that there are particular moments that are worth sharing. So in determining the editorial direction, it was really things that we were maybe engaging with every day, things that were happening in our lives every day, and really interrogating that. When we first started out, um, Jamaica, so this was in 2017 or 18, Jamaica had issued a state of emergency for Montego Bay. And one of our contributors wrote this piece about like what it meant to always have a precarious sense of security and safety while living in Jamaica as a woman, and how, you know, through the constant acts of like street harassment and gendered violence towards women and girls, how like she started to interrogate what that her personal safety versus the nation's safety. And I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about. Not like when particular things happen to us, maybe we're so caught up in you know, just getting through our day or like, you know, trying to survive that we don't have the time to think about things. And I really felt like Bashi can be and is striving to be a place where we are unpacking and starting to create discussions about the things that are happening to us, whether it be on the island or in the diaspora.
No, and I think shared experience is something that really goes towards building a community. And, you know, you mentioned one person having that experience, and I'm sure she's not the only one. And then it goes beyond that, you know, as someone who has experienced street harassment, I can relate to that, even though I'm not part of
Right.
you know, your specific community or culture. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when we created this, we had our primary audience in mind. So every single time we're writing, we're always writing for, you know, Jamaican folks in mind. There's this sort of shared sense of understanding when we write about particular things. So, you know, some things don't warrant a huge explanation if we understand that it's sort of universally understood, at least universally understood within a specific context of community or shared heritage. And I think that helps a lot because there's this sense of accessibility, and this barrier that is removed, making folks understand that, you know, even though our aspects of our identity or cultural production or culture, music, whatever, are not discussed in certain spaces, that there's at least this space where we can talk about it.
No, I feel like you're on the right track here.
Thanks.
So right on your website, I noticed that you have your community calendar, and I was just wondering if you saw these community events as an integral part of the magazine at first, or did it just kind of unfold naturally?
The community calendar is a strictly digital component of Bashi, but what kept happening was people would visit Jamaica or talk about visiting Jamaica, and I'd often get fielded questions like, "What's going on, like in Kingston? What's going on in like Montego Bay?" And I'm like, "Here are a list of events," or I'd go through like my friends who I knew were connected to certain spaces and be like, "What's going on?" Or I would have people who were coming from abroad, like, "Oh, I know there's a Jamaican community in Toronto. What's going on here?" So the community calendar really came as a response to folks asking, like, what's going on where there are Jamaican people. And I'd be like, okay, here are the things that I know. So it's been really cool in that capacity, because I think, like, you know, both within the archive and the events that are upcoming, that it's really varied. So there's like art exhibitions, there are film screenings, there are like block parties, there are just like really cool events where folks can connect with other creatives or just learn knowledge. And I think that that's a really cool feature. A lot of people, specifically within the context of Kingston and visiting Jamaica, a lot of people tend to visit the North Coast, where all of the resorts are, or like particular aspects of the West Coast. Where again, like those are like heavily promoted and branded as tourist areas. And I would always tell people like go to Kingston, even if you're visiting, like maybe spend like a day or two there because that's to me like Kingston is like this beautiful cultural hub. Every single time I visit Jamaica, there's like 10 events going on all at once. And I'm always racing from like venue to venue to venue to see if I can like try and like get everything. Um, because I don't think that space is understood as a place where tourists can visit and interact and engage a little bit more with particular events. But the community calendar, I believe, affords a space where folks can see what's happening regardless of where they are.
No, I think that makes sense. And have you had people submitting events to you or?
Right now, it's all curated. So it's the events that I find or that come across our like table or an editor suggests or things that I hear about or things that I see online on Instagram or Twitter. And I feel like there are events that speak to what I think Bashi readers and our audience would be interested in, then I just plug them in.
No, I think that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you feel it's important to have a community of readers and not just subscribers and advertisers?
So, in some of the most like adverse situations in my own life where I thought that I would be able to like pull up myself by my bootstraps, it's always better to have community, and it's always been better to be supported and to be uplifted by community. And I carry that same ethos into creating this magazine and into cultivating the space that this is. A lot of folks who have been engaging with Bashi have been engaging with us from the very jump. And I think that, nobody had a reason to believe in it, or, nobody had, like, for someone to have figured out on their own will that Bashi was something that they wanted to participate in or support. Like, I think that means everything. And I believe like mobilizing through and with and alongside a community is something that I've really tried to embody in creating Bashi and like be mindful of in creating our editorial content. I find like there are stories that we publish that may be about siloed experiences, but if I look at our entire editorial coverage on a whole, since the day that we've published, a lot of the stories that are being written about are about like shared experiences and have some element of community in them. Our first cover story was by Protege, was featured Protege, who is like an incredible performer, an incredible human who has done a lot of work outside of his own outside of creating music to really promote and cultivate a sense of community within Kingston through the various different projects that he undertakes through his collective. Nicole Dennis Ben, who was our second cover story, was, she was sort of Jamaica's, like, I wouldn't say she's not the first openly queer woman, but she has been, in her literary work, she's been known to carry the stories of Jamaican queer folks and Jamaican folks who are, the everyday Jamaican who works in particular industries, hold them and carry their narratives in her work. In her most recent work, she did the same thing of talking about the Jamaican migrant experience and what it means to be an undocumented immigrant. All of those stories are centered around communities. And I think that is an essential component of what makes Bashi what it is.
No, I really like that. And I feel that we talk about how it takes a village to raise a child, but we forget that it takes a village to be a good person and to have, that sense of belonging and to that help when you do get knocked down or have a rough time or, even just need a little encouragement that you're doing okay.
Right.
What would you say has been the biggest hurdle in building this community?
I think one of the biggest hurdles has been transitioning Bashi from a passion project to like a business and like scaling it towards something that can create revenue so that we have more resources to do things. So a lot of the things get done by obviously like our hardworking um, editors and contributors who are all like paid for their labor. But in the instances where we don't have like enough resources to spread around, like a lot of times it's me like just jumping and going to Kingston and just like getting as many things as I can done so that we can have content. So that's definitely been one of the largest hurdles that I think we're slowly transitioning into rectifying.
No, I think that makes sense, and it's not uncommon for these projects that or these ventures that start out as passion projects. Um, and if you're comfortable, you don't have to. Would you mind sharing something that you wish you knew before you started Bashi?
Yeah, definitely how much of an undertaking it is just doing an entire publication. Um, and I certainly had experience while I was at the, the Underground, which is the publication that I had mentioned at my at UTSC. But I believe, like at that time, like we had a budget. It was pre Doug Ford cutting out those things. And we had money allocated to hire folks who can work on graphics or who can handle the web or who can handle a variety of different moving parts, the operational aspect of it, as well as the editorial aspect of it. Um, and now, because there is a value on Bashi, on honoring folks for their labor. I end up taking on like a few roles that would otherwise be managed by other people. So it's definitely given me some perspective of how to um, on just the capacity that it takes to like run a publication. And this is like on a small level. Like imagine like on a much larger scale, like all the things that are involved.
No, it's a big undertaking, and I commend you for how beautiful it continues to be.
Thanks.
Do you have any advice for someone who's looking to start a magazine then?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the biggest barriers is people thinking that it has to be this beautiful, like perfectly executed thing. And I think it just one of the things that I hear people saying is that they don't know where to start. And I'm always just like, just start. Like buy a domain, get a website, like start publishing like one article a day. And then once your sensibilities improve in editorial and things of that nature, like I think it all comes along, but you have to start somewhere. So whether it's like, if it's something strictly digital and it's starting up a digital space, or if it's something like a zine and it's in print, then I always just say like start, like get your feet wet, test out the waters to see if it's something that you enjoy, and then just do it.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And if I can offer my own advice, sitting, you know, away from a magazine, is don't be afraid to ask for help. I think,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
you make use of your community, and then they'll become your readership, right?
Right.
And just to finish us off, do you mind sharing one of your greatest feel good moment that's come out of this community that you've created or tapped into?
Yeah, so last year we were able to do a few really great pop-ups in Kingston. So the first the or one of the pop-ups that we did was a small incubator program where we basically made an accessible space for folks to come in to learn about how to get started in publishing and pitching and sort of just get their digital portfolios going. So that was really cool. Some of those folks had written for Bashi, some of them hadn't, but it was great to see that there was an interest to do that. We had originally planned one, but because there was such a high demand, we ended up doing two. So that was like a really great feeling. The second really cool thing that we did was we got in touch with Khalik Allah, who is an incredible director and cinematographer who had done some work with Beyonce for Lemonade. He had recently released a feature called Black Mother, which was an ode and like a love letter to Jamaica. And he was here for TIFF, so I went to go see the movie or the film, and I just asked, like, have you shown this film in Jamaica? And he was like, no, I haven't. And I'm like, oh my gosh, stop the press. I will make it happen. So I like got in touch with the University of the West Indies, their English department, which houses their film program. And we were able to do a screening of the film at the university, which I thought was so cool because it was such a busy week. I believe it was the same week that one of the island's biggest artists had his homecoming concert. So there was a lot of people that wouldn't normally be in Jamaica. They were there. So folks who were there for the concert, who heard about the movie, who he had like met, you know, wherever he had traveled, had also come into this space. So it was just like a really beautiful moment, and that was probably one of like my proudest moments, that like through Bashi we were able to, you know, sort of do work beyond the pages and create these physical spaces where folks can engage with different aspects of culture as well.
That sounds absolutely beautiful. I love that you just keep giving back and that you get it kind of tenfold, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. I was just, do you ever sleep? You just seem so busy.
Yes. Lately, actually, you know what? If I can tack on to the advice question, I think that's what I would say. I had like a really, really frustrating 2019 and I burnt out, and it was a very terrible experience. And I think one of the things that I've learned, that I certainly learned, was to like pace myself. And like somebody that I know just released a documentary called Rest is a Right. And I keep reminding myself that, like, you know, in the same capacity that I deserve to eat and like, you know, do all the other things that I need to do to survive, rest is also one of those things. So I keep reminding myself that you have to take care of yourself in the process, or else everything kind of falters as well.
Yes, and that rest is more than just sleeping. It's, you know, relaxing or
right,
all those wonderful things that we do that are unproductive.
Right, exactly.
Is there anything that you would like to plug, and where can people find out more about Bashi?
Yes, so you can go to www.bashymagazine.com. That's BASHYMAGAZINE.com. And that's the same for all of our handles, Bashi Magazine on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well. Yeah, that's where folks can get in touch. We launched a video platform, or a video content a few years ago. And I think we're just trying to keep that steady, pushing stuff out with that. But the website is where everything lives. So that is where you can go.
And like I said, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to Sharine for coming today to speak with us about building communities through magazines. This has been a really great conversation, and I know that our listeners will appreciate it. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review AudioMag on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Magazines Canada on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Mags Canada, and on LinkedIn as Magazines Canada for more magazine news and resources. Thanks for listening, and thank you again to Sharine for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
A new episode of AudioMag will return on April 8th. AudioMag is a Magazines Canada podcast produced by Messenger Mag Media. We recognize the funding of the Canadian Department of Heritage through the Canada Periodical Fund.